Hello, guys. I got on somebody from UMP today, and we also got on the goat Sage. Sage, you want to introduce yourself, and then Yavo, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say a lot of you probably already know me. I'd say regular listeners definitely have heard my voice plenty of times before. But if you want to find me on TikTok, it's at Sage7646. And that's really the only presence I have on anything.
And then Yavo.
Yeah, I'm Yavo. I am technically the owner of the United Marxist Pact, but I don't know if I don't really see that as like a role that is filled. Um, it's weird. Anyway, um, I the only way you can get in contact with me if anyone is interested is by my Discord. I should probably create an email at some point. But I don't know. Maybe I'll just tie it in with whatever party structure forms that I'm a part of.
For sure, for sure. Oh, what is United Marxist Pact? Can you sort of describe it for anybody who doesn't know?
Um, Presently or where it started and how it directed.
Whichever one you prefer.
Okay. Oh, I guess the easier one is where it is right now. So right now it acts as a discussion and education space um, that kind of like a safe, like a place in the internet carved out for the discussion all of all things Marxist of but also we also allow the discussion um, of things outside of Marxism, but we are like all the core groups. We intend to take any discussion from it in the hopes of refining Marxism further, contributing and developing and helping people be connected. Although that's pretty limited in scope due to the security um, aspect of or lack of it with Discord and anyone you meet on it. So it can work. It can act as that. You just always have to be careful. Just be cautious, make multiple connections, and make sure that you don't just have singular chains of people, but rather like connected circles,
Mm, mm.
I guess. Yeah. Sorry.
Are you worried about feds at all in that, or like, does it not never even cross your guys' mind?
Um, we've always had we have a weird relationship with that. As far as feds go, feds will join. Um, but if you have a specific line of work, like feds, their job will be to disrupt, to
Mm,
act as saboteurs, to sabotage aspects of it. Um, Sometimes it'll be for intelligence gathering, but in terms of operating on Discord, the um, you'll only really have non-US, uh, geopolitical feds be directly infiltrating. As far as it goes for larger countries, anyone who can just buy data from Discord, like Discord will just sell it to them. Anyone who's willing to pay is able to pay, able to keep connections. They don't really need to directly infiltrate. But yeah, so basically, if you have an organization and you just focus on performing duties and just having people check to see how they're performing the duties, feds operating within are will be spotted more often. You'll have some who stick around longer, genuinely helping, acting as free manpower in the meantime. Um, so, there are cases where you can find out if someone is like you can bot a Fed, and they might be acting in such a way where it might be beneficial for you. So you could sit on that information, like let someone else know um, that you suspect it for whatever reasons, and that they are still useful in terms of fulfilling a core function of your group and having it such that other people, many people are trained. Like having it's it falls into sort of a complex relationship with the division of labor,
Yeah.
because within any sort of group, division of labor will happen, and simultaneously, if you work to mitigate it, there's a lot of different ways to do this. But if you work to mitigate it by having people cross-trained in performing different tasks and duties, then you can make it a lot easier so that if you do find out that a core member is a purge, or sorry, a core member is a fed, who then you have to kick out, right? You have to purge them. Or they are generally just a rogue person who just doesn't really hold to shared consensus and decisions. Where it's like vital of vital importance, then you don't have to worry about how to switch them out. You could just you already have other people who are trained on it. It's just healthier for like any sort of organizational. Yeah, it's helpful for a lot of characters. It's helpful for a lot of reasons, but that's another way that you can counteract this sort of thing. So we've given this a lot of thought. And ultimately, we are at the place. We're at the conclusion with what we've built as an educational and discussional space is really the highest that you can go on Discord. You can do some things like you can just have you can create basically large group chats for people in your area, but yeah, with Discord, educational spaces are the highest that you can really build. Any further, you have to move off of it,
Yeah.
whether developing your own platform, or or any sort of thing. And if anyone is interested in that, I know that Damon Sultan has been trying to outline a project. So if there's any serious programmers out there who want to work on developing an international website for that sort of thing, he's been working on a project. It's been on hiatus because the original group of people only got so far to developing like initial drafts before the project sputtered out. But
Slowing you down there.
sorry. Yeah.
You were talking about this is a open discussion space for Marxism and sort of finding like a scientific line. I've always found that Marxism it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's a big umbrella term with a lot of different you have like Marxist Leninists and MLMs and people who consider themselves more orthodox Marxist, or even like people who we would consider like democratic socialists, like Corbynites who like consider themselves Marxist. How do you sort of foster a space for like open discussion, finding a scientific line without it falling into very ugly infighting?
Yeah, that's been a long. We didn't really figure out a way to do it. We just kind of survived through all of them.
Okay.
Because we used to take a hard Marxist-Leninist line, an orthodox Marxist-Leninist line, right? Like following closely in the footsteps of Lenin, Stalin, and flirting with Mao, but not getting too much more than that. And basically, as a result of so many argumentations, we came to the conclusion, the official line of the core group that comprises the mediators and core theoretical members. So this isn't like a line that is held to all people within the space, but the line of the people who dominate the space and who direct it, is that a lot of these party lines are historical. Like they didn't come out of people arguing within the circumstances that we are. They came from people who were within a different sorts of party relations, who engaged in much broader lines of work than what the United Marxist Pact engages with, or is capable of engaging with, as we presently believe. And um, and towards that end, when we have right? So so in that regard, we have this respect of various lines as as the result of the struggle they were forged in. And we encourage members to look at their present lines of work, to argue amongst each other for shared lines. That is like not arguing about old party lines, but rather looking at the developments from those party lines and fostering a looking forward rather than a looking behind. Such that, we encourage people not to fight about, oh, someone should have done this, they should have taken this person's line, this person's stance, they should have gone this direction. And I mean, it's still good to look back at history and say, well, how would things have gone differently if they had done that, and seeing if that would lead to more favorable socialist development. And how you define socialism, right? These are all very important things. And what we focus on is trying to get people to look towards what are they literally saying, and what are their objectives, what are their methods towards that, and what is the language that they use. So
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'll say too is with like discussion around different topics and different lines that get taken up. I remember when I first joined, honestly, I kind of said some things. I had some very liberal takes. Like I was like, "Oh, I don't like Stalin at all." And then people came in and rather than just like throwing slogans at me, they gave me sources and helped me research these issues and these topics that are essential to coming to a correct analysis. And I think that's a real big strength is the fact that there are people who, rather than just throwing slogans and insults at new people who might take an incorrect line, instead they try to educate people. And I think that educational aspect is one of the things that has made me look at the UMP very fondly.
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
appreciate that.
that makes sense. And of course, yeah, sometimes I think communist arguments are important. Like, what line you take is important to some extent, but sometimes it does feel like we're arguing over dead people. I mean, two debates that really aren't that relevant to the modern day. And it really is. I mean, I find it fascinating how Marxism does need open debate, open discussion to find the right line, but also it needs, once it finds the right line, it sort of needs to clamp down on it, right? Like it can't really allow any more discussion. It needs a party line that's scientific, and then it can't allow wreckers in, right? Like left wing deviations or right wing deviations. Um, what is your ultimate hope for this project, like in the future? Do you see it going anywhere, evolving past Discord, maybe like a website or something of that sort, or is it just sort of staying on Discord for right now?
Um, yeah. So if you ask Damon, right, his belief that the ultimate resolution of UMP would be the development of a website that he was that of the project was titled PravdaNet, or no, yeah, PravdaNet, or it was Proletarianet. But it a website with very specific design functions in line with, like, for instance, we kind of looked around at the different social medias that existed, right? And they are specifically designed um, to get the user base to engage in very specific ways. Twitter was always made to make people toxic, to force them to oversimplify their arguments, preventing them from being able to say all of what they want to say. The method of connecting them directly connected them with people who disagreed with them in such a way that they weren't that they wouldn't have a productive conversation that expanded their argument, but um, merely uh, that merely made it into a fitting match. And so, and we did that, we looked at Facebook, we looked at Instagram, and we self-evaluated Discord, especially Discord. Most of our emphasis went into Discord and Twitter because Twitter was like the prime example of the opposite of what you want, and Discord was something that helped us in the present moment to but that we found constantly had significant faults. So with that project in mind, we had these sorts of considerations in mind, and put forward our objective of designing a website that explicitly from its design just culturally reinforced, in-depth, being expressing, putting down all of your thoughts, being able to refer to prior things that you've said or that other people have said, being able to have it be condensable, like having multiple ways of communicating things. For instance, having accessibility features for the hard of reading, etc. The video video aspects of it are probably going to be the hardest part of that, just because there's a reason why most sites that have that use videos just have a connection to YouTube, like they just connect to YouTube, but for such a project it wouldn't be able to do that. So that sort of project was ultimately recognized as the next logical stage of where UMP could go. But apart from that, at best, another alternative way, if we're thinking of merely the social aspect rather than any technological development, but rather just merely the people who make it up.
I do find the internet sort of an amazing way of organizing people. I mean, I think a lot of people forget that a lot of the original Communist Party started as like book reading clubs or newspapers. They started off very humbly. And I think the internet really is our modern day medium of organizing people, and not only within a country, but globally. So I'll ask you this.
I do have thoughts on that too.
I'll ask you this: like, what utility does the internet have as a medium of organizing people?
I have a lot that I could say on this, and yeah. But really quick, the other final stage of UMP would be if UMP was able to form an official international community with other groups. I think that would be very strong. I think that would be I would love if that was a step towards rebuilding a new, international movement. Yeah, so that's the second one. And on the internet, so I had these lessons. There was something I observed, and it was pretty funny because as a teenager, right, Discord was fresh and young, and the internet was, this was just after the point in time where all the politicians were really worried about the internet. In hindsight, it was because, it's the way for all the masses to engage with each other directly without any sort of intermediary. It couldn't be as controlled at that moment as the as conventional forms of organizing could be, right? Where you wouldn't be able to have the direct workers from one country be able to directly engage with the workers of another country. You'd have to have them send representatives, and then as a state entity, you could exaggerate and make bigger the personal differences between people, between different delegates, and thus power relations between two countries, working class, by a smaller number of actors within that. So in that aspect, right, it's pretty good. But back to the time period. I circulated, I was kind of engaged in all sorts of political communities. But a funny thing that I noticed was that the nationalist group, right? People who had nationalist ideas, they would go online and they'd make their group, and you can't actually make sure that anyone is from any place.
Mhm.
Like if I make a Discord for like I guess we could just say Minecraft, right? If I made a Minecraft Discord community, um, you people join, you don't even begin to like question, like you can't really know where they're from. The only thing you can know is, do they speak English or do they speak a language that I speak, right?
Yeah.
And um, and that's it. That's the only real distinction. So in that way, right? The internet itself as um, without algorithmic intervention, automatically allows for the working class of any given nation to engage with each other without even conceptualizing a nation. Like it's a glance at a post nation international society.
Yeah,
Um,
and could I say one thing about that?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, I'm sorry, but one thing that I realized was really important was also the fact that the UMP has connections and partnerships with other servers. I mean, could you go into a bit of detail about why that's important? And also, I guess just like how these connections actually enhance the mission of the UMP.
Yeah. So we haven't partnered with any new groups recently, mostly just because we haven't we go through periods of like, just of internal development and then external reach out and then internal development and external reach out. Um, and so we haven't partnered with anyone new in the recently. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to us. Um, and we 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 try to aim to connect. So not only do we facilitate partnerships. Partnerships is the wrong word because we don't compare with other groups to compare our lines and contrast them. We should. That would be cool. I would love if that happened, but the format of Discord, how it operates, um, doesn't. It's difficult to have that. It's difficult to have that. Um, if anyone wants to do that, again, we are 100% interested in that. Believe we don't believe in ourselves to be the movement, but merely a part of the movement. Um, we don't expect to subsume it. We expect to be subsumed by it, which will be, mutual subsumption. Um, I'll try to avoid going into dialectics because, yeah, I already go into enough detail as it is. Like, don't feel bad about cutting me off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
any of these topics I go on forever. But
yeah, but
the
even with dialectics, I guess one thing that also struck me with this server was the fact that when I first joined, I mean, I didn't even know what dialectics were, but now I would consider myself someone fairly well versed in that. And part of that's because there's an extensive library on the UMP. Can you go into a bit of detail on how that was constructed and what steps were taken, and also how the library on the UMP continues to expand?
Yes, and I can give examples of errors that we learned from on that one. Lessons, positive and negative that were learned from. So with the library, a lot of those resources were compiled by Damon and many other people. And Damon was the one who ultimately organized most of it. There were people along the way who would chip in, and and it wasn't insignificant. I wish that I could remember their names because we really should have written them down. I feel bad about not. I feel bad about um, not remembering and giving these folks recognition because we had a lot of people who helped a lot along the way where they would help chip in, they would participate in one project, and maybe they'd help with another project later on, but they'd help out with one and then move along um and yeah. So the library was a very was a big project. Downsides that we had with it was that so Damon's methodology when it started out was that he intended to just throw a bunch of things in there with with the hope and intention that people going through it over time would engage with certain things and then they would write up critiques of certain things um, and uh, and 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 would develop, high quality critiques of those things. Which is why, like if you go through it, you might find you will probably find some recommended content, reading, etc., from people who we fundamentally disagree with, including some modern social chauvinists like Infrared and such. Um, because it had that intention going through. At a later point, Damon went through and decided like nobody's really engaging with it that way. That was our lesson, unfortunately. Nobody's really engaging it with it that way. So he went through and cleaned out some of the obvious ones who we just don't like, where we don't find any value in what they said, where
Hmm.
they weren't really contributing new thoughts or dialogue. They weren't productively contributing to something. They were just acting as propaganda, not in the sense of productive towards mobilizing the masses, but in terms of deluding the masses.
Um,
Um,
Sorry, cutting you off. How do
yeah.
you exactly determine that, or how did Damon determine that? Because like, I think sometimes it's a very easy, like in terms of like infrared, it's very easy, but like for some theorists, it's a fine line. I feel like, isn't it?
Yeah, so we draw our focus is primarily on positive developments. So like Paul Cockshott is well known for being fairly transphobic, and we platform his economic stuff and give footnotes and clarifications for parts of it where his misunderstandings show, like when he economically evaluates gay couples, right? Whether gay men or lesbians. Um, like he, where that sort of where he has misunderstandings go through. We endorse people who produce positive, like real positive, productive contributions to the international workers movement,
Right.
and to and to dialectical theory in general.
Paul
Um,
Coggshot find interesting, and I think you're kind of right there, where like somebody can make really good contributions to theory. I mean, his economic works are excellent. I think like his videos, especially a lot of his work, his videos, his contributions to Marxist economics, and even his arguments for like labor theory value. I think are some of the best in the field, at least like in the modern century. Like nobody else is arguing like him in the 21st century except maybe like Richard Wolff, but Richard Wolff doesn't get that deep into it. But then again, like he's transphobic. Like you're absolutely right. He's like chauvinist. I think honestly that might be even true of Marx himself. I mean, to some extent, I mean Marx used some language that we aren't very fond of in the 21st century, especially like in his letter to Engels in I believe like 1862. But in Marx's conclusions, Marx's work is like excellent. I think like the concept of let's say cancel culture within Marxism is impossible to some extent because somebody's scientific contributions our scientific contributions, no matter what their personal behavior was, like their analysis of the world, their analysis of capitalism, their economic theories, their interpretations of this or that. And whether or not they were a good person personally, like, you cannot deny that somebody made contributions that were important to a field. I mean, if Isaac Newton tomorrow, and I don't know that much about the biography of Isaac Newton, or Einstein tomorrow turned out to be like horribly racist, and I believe Einstein himself did have some eugenicist beliefs. Even if they turned out to be these horrible people, E equals MC squared is still true. I mean, the three laws of physics that Isaac Newton found out are still true. So, I mean, it's the same thing with these philosophers. I think cancel culture is a very hard thing to apply to Marxism.
Yeah, I would agree
Um,
with that. And I guess one thing I'd say is also, I've been reading Bernstein's Cromwell and Communism. I mean, Bernstein was a revisionist. He rejected the dictatorship of the proletariat, but at the same time, his analysis of English history is incredibly useful and incredibly accurate, and we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by ignoring that. And I mean, we even saw with Rosa Luxemburg, she said some very positive things about LaSalle, even though, yeah, he too had his faults and was a revisionist. I mean, he was a reformist, yet at the same time, some of his ideas are still useful and should be understood at the very least, even if disagreed with.
Yeah, absolutely. I
I
mean,
suppose I approach it from a different way.
Mm. Oh, what way do you approach it from?
Um, I approach it as far as like, so for instance, with Isaac Newton, when he outlined his laws of motion, um, it may be perceived as material fact, but it is less about that and more about that he contributed to a discussion. Like he contributed positively to discussion, making affirmative claims that could be discussed, analyzed, tested, and after when faults were found, right? It became a new question within the field, within the community, to find out how do we resolve this issue for this thing that works in so many ways but has faults in these categories when put to these tests. Um, where like it kind of gets in the thing. I guess on my end, I fall into not believing of facts at all, but the motion of
Did he cut out for you?
people who will build upon further what where I was wrong.
Yeah, you cut off a little bit towards the end there. But I think I get what you were saying. That basically, like, there's two kinds of discussions, like, compared to like somebody's private life, but then there's also things they put forward for critique and contributions they make to the field, and you sort of have to separate those spheres. Is that what you were basically trying to argue? Let's see.
I think he left for a moment, but I guess I don't want to speak for him, so I'm not going to say anything in that regard. But what I'd say in terms of this discussion, I think something we also got to approach this with is looking at people who are arguing in good faith versus people who are arguing in bad faith. And something I realized on the UMP was that people sometimes do come in just to mess with us and troll, but something that I really appreciated was that the people there were mature enough to realize who was doing that and who was just naive and who simply had a different opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's so important. I mean, finding somebody who's genuine. I mean, uh, besides a difference of opinion, like, I've been surprised, like, like, obviously I'm on the Stalin side of the debate. I've been surprised that some trots are actually genuinely willing to have a dialogue, and we might not disagree on everything, But at the end of the day, I think I can consider them comrades, even if like I will still believe in like Trotsky deserved the ice axe in the end
Yeah.
or something.
And I mean, a good example of that was Sam Marcy, if we're going to get into history. I mean, he was a Trotskyist, but he supported the DPRK, he supported Cuba. I mean, he supported all the actually existing socialist countries, and he supported the Soviet Union's efforts in keeping socialism within Czechoslovakia. I mean, he's the kind of Trotskyist that regular Marxist Leninists can get behind.
Yeah, and then there's other trots who like in the UK there was this one party SWP. I wrote about it in my article. I forget its exact abbreviation, so I might be wrong. It's been a while since I wrote my article. But they were literally supporting Yeltsin and like capitalist restoration, or like there were a couple of trots in the color revolutions in Poland and Romania, and et cetera, et cetera. Like a couple of Trotskyist groups that helped overthrow communism and implement in capitalism. And so like that's the difference between like Marxism and Marxism itself was flawed to some extent. I will say like it didn't decide to side with the USSR until it was under Khrushchevite revisionism, and so there's that whole thing right there. Um, like why on earth would you like decide to back the Khrushchevite USSR? Like, defend like you can defend it while critiquing it, of course, and there's like nuance there. But really, it's like, are you arguing in good faith, or are you arguing to dismantle socialism? Are you arguing to wreck the movement? Like, who just has simply a difference of opinion, and who's a wrecker? Like, that's always such a hard thing to figure out, I feel like.
Yeah, it's it's interesting hearing you guys talk about your lenses through that. But yeah,
Yeah.
because
No, go
I
ahead.
don't know. Do you have a yeah? Because I've recently been investigating a group, and I'd never heard of them before. But have you guys ever heard of Waldorf?
No.
Wait, the school?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I have. I had a friend who went to one of them. It seems like a cult from what I've heard.
yeah. It's kind of a funny thing because I've been engaging with them in on the ground, and at least with the ones in my area, because it is a diverse thing. It is this funny thing where they are utopian communists, but they weren't connected with the movement. They don't really understand or acknowledge it. In New York, for example, they have a full commune. Now, it's bourgeois in character, as in it is a private school wherein it costs more to set up a facility. So as a result, you have primarily people from wealthier backgrounds who engage with that sort of thing directly. Um, but they develop communist theory towards actually developing communes. And they approach it from a very interesting direction. So if you read their theory, a lot of it uses spiritual terminology because the original guy who founded it had a conception of spirituality, but because of how the schools, how the International Association of these schools were set up, that spiritual they didn't have a central doctrine. Um, so all of those spiritual terms, talking about like the spirit of the child and such, um, be turned into philosophical ones because you had different groups who weren't in day-to-day conversations with each other, reading these things and trying to come to terms with it, trying to understand what was it about. What did what did Rudolph mean when he said the spirit of the child is in their eyes or whatever, right? And and so you'd have people at like 4 different schools, for example, looking at this thing, trying to understand it, like, well, maybe you meant this, and they would go back to teaching. They'd be teaching a child, trying to understand this spiritual jargon, and as a result of them reconnecting with each other periodically and discussing these things without a doctrine, the spiritual language just over time has converted into philosophical ones in that funny way where and it reminded me when I was engaging with this stuff and talking with these teachers. um it reminded me of Marx's conception of the transition from religion, right, where religion will be replaced with philosophy. And when I engaged with this school of thought, I just saw that plastered all over it of like, yeah, Marx called it, I guess. But he, without even knowing you guys, without him even being alive when you guys came into being. Um, and so it's pretty funny. It has some weird characteristics. Like you'll find some weird strain of anti-vaxxer within some of these schools. Um, and yeah, that's always weird.
Yeah, and I remember my friend who went to one. When she went to like regular school in elementary school, she couldn't read because they never focus on like actual education. You weren't allowed to wear shirts with logos. I mean, it
Oh,
was ridiculous stuff.
I can comment on that. Because it does make sense if she went from Waldorf to a standard state school. Um, they do teach reading at a later point. So if you leave if if you leave a Waldorf, so if you go to Waldorf from like kindergarten to like second grade, if you aren't there for third grade, then you will miss out on some stuff. Um, and the focus of the school is, at least with what I've encountered here, in my region, I I do want to emphasize, there is a lot of room for like there's a lot of different schools and they're very autonomous. Um, so, there is differences in terms of how effective they are in their focus of their school of thought. Um, and their school is developed as an opposition to the original Prussian model, our which is what most of the world's education system is derived upon. That is the training of factory workers, the implementation of the normalization of discipline, of respecting a rotating authority. That is like the reason why you have students go to a different teacher with a different class every year, from first grade to second grade to third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade to sixth grade, is to put them into is to continually put them into an environment where they have to respect an authority, but that authority is not consistent. It's not a specific person who they trust because that person has given them, guidance on innumerable things throughout their time, but rather a rotating door authority, so that you normalize the concept of managers who can be replaced when they get out of line. Um,
Yeah, and
and
I guess one
yeah,
thing I could say about that also is when I mean these schools first started coming about, we basically had them with like what you said about factory workers. We basically had them not paying attention to any subjects that they deemed irrelevant, which is actually how flat earthers became prominent in the United States. Like the early schools wouldn't really pay attention to just like geography class, so they would allow this one guy to do lectures at their schools about why the earth was flat simply because they didn't find it their priority to stop him. I mean, in terms of education, I recently read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think that's a really good book for finding a model that counters that by having the teacher and the student basically their roles being transformed into one that's more I guess it's less preachy from the teacher and more actually seeking to create discussion. I think that model is definitely one that should be advanced. And again, just the fact that going back to a previous topic we talked about, just having conversations to get to these solutions, I think that's really important because by having those kinds of conversations about education, I mean, it's always going to be continually improved. And I think, again, with conversations, you need to first address the problems and then try something. Like maybe some of the Waldorf schools, they try to correct it, maybe some of them don't work, like the one I mentioned. If that's the case, then again, this is a method of just like trial and error.
Mm. I
Yeah,
think to some
absolutely.
extent that is important. I mean, you do need this trial and error, you do need discussion, but also you do need you do need like a little bit of discipline. I mean, the point of democratic centralism. I don't know how the Waldorf
I
schools work
I
exactly.
have a good point on that. I
Okay,
have so much to say on discipline because
okay,
yeah,
for sure. But like the point of like democratic centralism was like, yeah, we debate, we agree on a line, and then we just all follow that line because otherwise, these parties would just become debate clubs that never get anything done. What was your point, Yavo?
so on the discipline factor, because I did recognize something. For instance, at the school I work at, um, th- I there's this new orchestra teacher, and she's coming in, towards the end of the year, second half of the year, so she's already having a rough time as it is. But and she's really cool. She was the ex-lecturer on Marxist economics at a university. Um, so I've really cool conversations with her. Yeah, you just meet these sort of people, at least at the one I'm at. Um, but yeah, I had this realization when I was looking at her class. Because I watch some of the other classes. I teach some specialized study classes, um, and and um, and I noticed I had this realization, of like, oh, for an orchestra to work, they must respect the authority of the baton, right? They must follow it to the beat. That is the thing that is keeping them together. And with how the Waldorf school is, with its manner of thought, it definitely isn't conducive to that sort of discipline. Um, like in a Waldorf school, I think that like a structured orchestra like that might have to come later because up till the point that kids are engaging with it in um, sixth grade, they're primarily given a space where they don't have as rigorous of discipline where
Yeah.
they do have discipline but in an organic sense where their discipline comes from their relationship and connection with the people who they've known for a while,
Mm.
and trusted authority figures. um, so it's interesting because yeah, there is definitely work that could be done in better figuring out um, what types of discipline that are needed. Because, um, like, for example, if you had a military structure, right, a military organ, uh, that necessarily needs discipline. You need people to be committed to something and people who are able to follow through with 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 consistency. You have to trust that they'll stick around, that they'll do their best to do what is needed to be done for strategic and tactical objectives. Um, you need people who will listen, for people who are for people who are organizing a large message, right? A holistic vision, right? So um yeah, there's definitely a lot of room to develop on
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of discipline, there's a lot. There's a lot that can be developed and further refined upon. And if anybody knows of any writings that goes into depth on that and that discusses the different environments with different needs, um, that develops new types of discipline and new needs of discipline, I'm yeah, just uh, figure out a way to shoot it over. I don't know how. I guess that'll be pretty easy if
Yeah.
someone shoots it your way and says send this to Yavo. Would you be able
For
to?
sure. I mean,
Would you be
I've
willing?
read
Oh yeah.
the only thing about education Marxism that I've read so far is like Gramsci's works, and he actually wanted all schools to sort of be like colleges almost like everybody's, and like the old type of colleges, not like our current colleges where like everybody's sort of intellectual. The kids are giving lectures too, in addition to the professors. The professors are more so guiding them. People are learning like a wide variety of things like philosophy and English and all at the same time. I think but like a vanguard kind of discipline within schools like that, like Gramsci was advocating, would be very hard. I don't
Yeah,
know. Saying what were I mean,
I
Sage, what
do.
were you gonna say?
I guess one thing I'd also add to that is also there's another book on education. So, Socialist Reconstruction by the PSL is a really good book because it actually goes into detail about how immediately after socialism takes hold in the US, how the education system could transform. And I mean, it's a really good book too, because it also details other sectors of society changing as well. And I think with that changing of society, recently I saw on the UMP there's been an interest in the communist mode of production. There's a whole library of works on there about that. And I think looking farther into the future to see how society can advance is pretty important. I'm very thankful that not only is the PSL taking those steps, but the UMP is also having those discussions.
Yeah, yeah. We have discussions on basically anything that someone brings up. Um, so open space. If anyone is having questions, like, um, yeah, sort of along those lines. Um, yeah, let's see, covered quite a bit of things. Um,
Yeah, we're about approaching the hour mark. If you guys want to wrap this discussion up, unless there's anything else we want to discuss, super quick.
Let
I
me
mean, yeah,
check. I guess one thing was when this all started out, did you expect it to be as big as it is today?
um, honestly, I didn't really have any expectations at all. Uh, it's kind of funny how it started out. Was it started out um as a bunch of leftists and communists, broadly, in the broadest sense, from different Minecraft servers who were minorities in all of those servers, and basically acting as like a cross-server connection because they were getting tired of edgy teenagers breaking our little our block houses, um, and so you had we it started out as a coalition of that, and that never went anywhere. We just kind of just stopped playing Minecraft and just started discussing Marxism more in depth. And from there, UMP emerged from that. Um, we went through a few iterations as a result of various factors, owners' accounts getting deleted, server owners having a friend come over and look at their Discord and say, "Oh," and then delete the server. Um, uh, and sometimes an old expired account that got banned that you can't transfer the ownership from. So yeah, and yeah, so it's been through a few stages, but it started out as just like a bunch of teenagers and young adults who played Minecraft who were tired of getting having that.
Isn't that how all these things always start out? It's always young people who are just mad at the current thing, or like a group, a
Yeah,
breakaway group.
and
Yeah.
how long has the UMP been around?
since 2019-ish. It Well, kind of variable. The seeds for it were in 2017, 2018. It started to form in 2019. It exploded in across 2020, 2021, 2022. And then it exploded.
Did he cut out again?
Um,
Oh, okay. He's back.
sorry. But yeah, so it took a while, and over the years we've gone through many splits, many purges, and yeah, it's kind of funny. Like in UMP's case, I don't know how this is as far as an event in communist organizing, but within UMP, the faction that ultimately won out, surviving all purges, was the teachers. Oh, I thought that was pretty funny when I had that realization like a month ago. Um, but also, if do you guys have any more questions on this thought? Because I did want to talk about the disagreement between most Marxists being on language and how that can be alleviated, like the real way to solve that problem in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, I think language is always such an important part of Marxism. I mean, it's always a source of debates.
Yeah, um, because we've had many arguments within our community, and I had this realization, there'd be some people who I chat with, I would show them like, hey, how does this look for like a program that this organization is doing? Like, is that something that we can endorse? Is there any critiques to be had? And they'll look at it and they'll be like, oh, yeah, it looks really good. And then you just show them the name that they self-identify as, the tendency that they self-identify as, and they'll just immediately backpedal and just take total, um, total and complete uh, aversion to it, like of opposition to it, treating them as people to be shot, um, merely over the name that they chose. And it was just a regular tendency name. Yeah, so there's aspects that emerges in, but in terms of language, right? Like Damon and I sometimes go through this where we develop different languages because we study and engage in different spheres and reconnect. Um, and that applies to other people too, but Damon won't pretend like we're on the same page. We'll actually discuss and actually clarify, like, hey, what do you mean by that? Would it fall into, yeah, um, so it's most observable with Damon, but with other people it's obvious as well. But on the question on language, right? We develop language not in necessarily a scientific manner, but um, in a describing manner. Like we talk, like you have a group of people talk together. If you have 5 people who meet and talk together, and you have another 5 people who meet and talk together, those 2 groups of 5 people will develop different language and different ways of articulating the same problem. And we have this tendency where people will go from one group to the other and dismiss them out of hand because they aren't using the same language. I don't think this is conscious for most people, right? For most people, I think it's the case where they they feel and genuinely recognize that they have a higher understanding that they came to from their own discussions. Um, and And when they encounter someone else saying something differently, like approaching a topic in a very different way, it can be difficult to not look at it and say, no, 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 you're approaching it all the wrong way, right? Because they approached it differently, and all the people who they talked with approached it from that similar way as well because they talked together.
Yeah, could I
Sorry.
say something about that?
Yes.
There's this one meme, and it kind of goes into how the same idea can be said different ways, and how people can develop very similar ideas completely unconnected. It's a Marxist meme, so of course it's a lot of text, but it basically says James Connolly and Lenin completely independently of each other, coming up with similar ideas, as well as Mao and Ho Chi Minh independently, well, prior to meeting, making similar analysis of the peasantry, well demonstrates the scientific nature of Marx's material analysis. I mean, that's a lot for a meme, but I just thought that that kind of brings a certain light to the idea that, yeah, we're going to be developing similar ideas by pursuing this framework. And I think you're right that we shouldn't try to like get all freaked out because somebody's saying the exact same thing just with different words.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
I think like a lot of tendencies tend to be very similar to each other. Like especially like decolonial Marxism or like Marxist Leninism or even like MLM. Like these have like a lot of gray areas where they're basically talking about the same thing. They just use different language.
Yeah,
yeah,
and also I'd say a lot of people don't realize that the different groups employing like different language and like describing themselves as different tendencies also has to do with material conditions. Like one group in one place is going to be like more nationalist with what they say, like if they're in a colonized area, they're going to be more nationalist, but then if you have somebody like I don't know, someone in the US, obviously that nationalism won't really serve to advance the struggle in any way. However,
Mm.
again, there are the people who don't understand that and think, well, if the American communists aren't nationalist, then I should criticize the Korean ones for being nationalist. And it's like, that's not really how it works. And then, same with MLM. It's like, if you're like in the Philippines, obviously those strategies have more of an appeal to you. But meanwhile, if you're in the US, I'd argue that, well, yeah, a lot of the analysis is correct, which is what we were saying that a lot of this is the same. It's like you're not going to develop the same framework as the Maoists in the Philippines
Mm.
because you're approaching it from a different lens and different material conditions.
yeah. Um, and my proposal for overcoming that is because people have a different approaches, and the impulsive one is to say is to tell other people to adopt your own developments. Um, and like because that does technically solve the problem, right? That technically solves that different language problem. Um, However, a more productive way that I believe to do that is to engage to work towards centralizing discussion, right? Getting these people to engage with each other more often makes them then share language, and if you work towards like if people genuinely care about the phrases, about how we describe the things that we perceive, then we need to have centralization organs. We need to connect with each other and just interact, not in a purely antagonistic sense, but in um, a positive discourse sense. Um, I've been accused of tone policing on that end for suggesting that we should try to be nicer with each other. Right. Um, Yeah. Oh, also, another thing. There's a huge shutting down, and I didn't realize this. I didn't realize this until Damon was going around trying to share his video series, right, where he covers various writings, shares thoughts. A similar thing to what Socialism for All does. And also, I just want to say, official endorsement, Socialism for All. He is continually, uh, he has his. He's the sort of guy who's only had a few errors over many years. And I don't even bother remembering what they are because they no longer matter. But he's consistently held true. He's consistently held very principled, and in any future movement, I think that anybody should try to have him involved in their project, because he contributes a lot. He's been a
Yeah.
huge theoretical help.
Especially his his recent theory, which I think he came up on his own. Nobody else came up with it. Was like the key strategy, where like we form our own working class sort of organization. We call ourselves the key strategy, where we say we will not vote for Democrats until they meet our demands. And so, like, the only way for Democrats to win elections, as in being the key, will be to appeal to like working class demands. I mean, I think that is a brilliant strategy. I think if that's done with a broad organization across multiple leftist parties, PSL, FRSO, Green Party, I mean, I think that would generally be the way to get some shit done in America, at least temporarily.
I mean, there also has to be the independence of the Vanguard Party, too. But yeah, I agree that making sure people actually fulfill their promises and putting that into a strategic framework is a good idea.
That sounds that's pretty interesting. I'll take a look because I haven't listened to his stuff recently, but yeah, if he's developing new conceptions, he's not merely reading old stuff. Then yeah, I'll make sure to check him out again. But on the topic of sharing videos, right? So Damon Sultan was doing a similar thing. But he, in so many spaces, so many communist, leftist, whatever spaces, um, immediately banned him, immediately prevented it, and he is not. He doesn't engage toxically, especially in terms of just. I'm sorry, 1 second.
Yeah, I'll say this about Damon Sultan for people listening. He's brilliant. He's a genius. Check out his YouTube. I mean, I've learned so much about theory from him. He's done a lot on family abolition. Like, that wasn't even a topic I really thought about, but his writings on that he put in the UMP were just phenomenal resources.
Oh, I'll have to check them
Glad
out.
to hear that. But many spaces don't allow people to connect, to share what they're developing, what they're making. And I I can't think of a possible reason why these spaces would prevent communists from sharing their thoughts and from networking with each other, from connecting and sharing the work that they're working on towards the aim, towards the movement. I'm highly suspect now of any of those groups, on principle that it smells like a group co-opted. I think that we should be wary about any groups or spaces that prevent, on principle, people who share their content and share with each other more developed thoughts that they're having, right? And so towards that end, right, UMP is and always will be allowing for small creators and communists in general to share the work that they're working on. You know, if they have a YouTube channel, they have a blog, they have, or you know, if they write articles to their party newspaper or whatever, right? You can share them in UMP. We don't do that. I I swear to God, like I don't I don't pull the Fed card often, but it smells like a co-opted movement, with Feds shutting down and restricting the capacity for people to connect and share highly digestible content. Like this might be their present way of keeping us contained, is because, you know, if you we are free to share all of our thoughts in long Discord messages, right? Like we can do that, and only maybe 10, 20 people will read through it and really give it thought, and it will really affect them. But if you because, you know, we also have a literacy crisis, at least within the United States, where people can't really engage with text. But with video format, where it is turned into an audio thing, right? Where where it's much more digestible, where it's much easier for people to engage with, where they're able to engage with it a little bit more passively. It's not as active in terms of just using your eyes and working reading ability. Um, and I like that's the only real reason that I could think of as far as why so many spaces don't allow this. Um, so I guess that's my word of warning and the promise of what UMP, of where UMP stands in regards to that. And yeah, so
For sure, for sure. All right, wrapping this up. Yavo, where can we best? Like, I mean, obviously it's UMP, but like, how can we get to UMP? How can we access it? I'll include like a link in the description. And you got any final words?
um my final words are that I could continue forever. I will never
For
have
sure,
final words.
for sure.
But I appreciate coming on. I appreciate you guys asking questions about this stuff, and I appreciate your guys' patience with when I go into depth on something, because
No problem.
I have, yeah, I go I have endless things to say
Sage, you got
on
anything
all the
left to
topics.
say?
Yeah, I guess it's really important to just have these spaces, and I'd say to any listeners to join this server. I mean, if we're gonna be honest, Discord does have that reputation of being like the not so cool social media, and I can understand why some of that might come into play, because there are definitely those corners of it. And I'd argue the same holds true for any social media, but at the same time, I'd say this is a real opportunity for people to actually get to engage in discussions and learn a lot about theory. So I'd say putting preconceptions aside is really important. And I think it's important too that people go and find these spaces where they can discuss stuff. I mean, obviously, I'm not dissing on any other forms of communication, any other forms of social media. I mean, obviously, organize in real life too. That's the most important thing. Going out there, meeting people in your community. But also, don't be afraid to go and try something new and to try to join a new to try to join some sort of new project that you might be unfamiliar with. I mean, I was very unfamiliar with Marxism when I first joined the UMP. I was basically someone who just thought Marx was the guy who said oppressing workers is bad. That's all I knew about him. And then these guys really helped me figure out what he wanted and his solutions to the problems that were facing us today and how to apply his dialectical and historical materialism.
Absolutely. We cannot discount the radicalizing effects of the internet, these spaces like this, and why they're so important. I mean, especially for beginners. I don't know. It's everybody's so jaded all the time, and we need spaces. We need like acceptance. We need educational opportunities for people who are just liberals and beginning to deprogram. All right. You guys have a good one. Thank you so much for coming on, Yavo. It's been fun. Don't worry about yapping too long. We love yappers. And yeah, you guys have a good day.
Yeah, you guys as well.
Great.
All right.
You too, Preet.
All right. Bye.
Goodbye.